way that you change perspectives in your books.
Oh,
It takes me a little while to get into it because it's kind of I love the fact that you write was as kind of first person for the main protagonist, but then we kind of see these other perspectives almost from a first person view without it being a first person view, if you will. So it takes me a little while to kind of get into it, but once I do kind of adjust to that writing style, I love the way it works out. Um, is that always intentional? And I guess it kind of it's quite complicated for you to. I mean, I guess you're always second guessing yourself to put yourself in the reader's position to make sure that they kind of it doesn't feel cumbersome to them. No.
yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking about that in the back of my head. I mean, I've always done first person narration in all the books that I've done.
Yeah.
Um, and then I started to bring the third person perspective into it throughout my sort of writing career. And now I just do it all the time. And you do see some people going, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. You know, you should be kind of like, very, it should be one or the other kind of thing." But I'm sort of happy to do it. It opens up opportunities and everything like that, to do stuff with the stories. And it's just very difficult to tell certain stories without moving to different perspectives at some point or another. But I always like to keep the first person there, to focus it on the main character essentially and show their sort of internal journey. And I think it's kind of important for to have that that insight into their psychology. And I kind of it does take a little bit of getting into, I think.
Yeah.
And some of the books have more characters than others, and some of them I know. I read some reviews and it's like it's quite slow and it's quite confusing to begin with. But my bargain with the reader is that by the end, you will understand it and it will work,
Yeah,
and
it adds
hopefully,
so much more of a payoff because you don't feel like you've just been in one person's shoes all the way through, even though it is kind of tough from the first person's perspective of Daniel in this case.
yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And I couldn't have told the story without bringing in the other characters. And I suppose you can do that in a strict first person, in certain ways with certain plot elements and certain ways, devices and ways of doing things. But I just like to do it like this. It's just nice to bring other characters in. And I personally don't mind reading books like that. So that's just the mindset that I approach it with when I'm writing. It's kind of
Yeah.
like I'm just going to go with this. You got your first person. I'm going to bring some scenes in the background too.
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't make that much difference to me.
No, no, I mean, I was like I said, it took me a little, kind of a few chapters to kind of get into it, but then your brain kind of shifts and it just kind of becomes almost like a natural, you just follow it like a natural, it's like, I don't know, I remember, it reminded me a little bit of when I remember watching like Train Spotting or these Irving Welsh movies because of the
Yeah.
kind of the Scottish accent. It kind of takes you a little while for kind of the brain to click in and just follow it completely. Well, this was the same. It was like the first couple of chapters was a bit like that, and then I just kind of really, it just felt really natural just to kind of change the chapters and the different people. It didn't kind of feel cumbersome at all in the end. Yeah.
Well, I mean that's really cool. But yeah, I mean, eventually, with all books, you get into the vibe of the style eventually, don't you? It's
Mm.
and you kind of you go with it, and hopefully people will go with it. So but
Oh, no,
it's
I
what I
think so.
do.
I
It's
think it
what
works
I've
for
always
everyone.
done, and it's
Hmm.
I mean, certainly the Man Made of Smoke, the new one, is not as difficult on that level as like the last one.
Yeah.
The Half Burnt House, the Angel Maker had a lot of different character perspectives in it, and I understand. I read the reviews, and it's like this is very confusing to begin with, but it's not by the end.
Oh.
Everything, if you just go with it and hopefully it's enjoyable while you're reading it, um, then it all makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, especially in this case, because we really want to be able to feel the father-son relationship, which they have in this book, which is there's a real emotional kind of push and pull in this, especially because they both feel that they're not they don't feel like the son doesn't feel like the father's proud of them, and he feels like he's in his father's shadow and he wants to live up to what his father has been as a policeman previously, whereas the father feels the other way around, that he feels that his son isn't proud of him. And curiously, they are both. I don't think this is a spoiler. No, this is kind of a teaser. Now that they are very proud of each other, but they can't really see it until they have this relationship that they share in the book because from these two perspectives. So I'm quite curious about what was the seed of that relationship that you kind of wanted to kind of center on this the feeling of pride of both of them and not kind of feeling that they live up to the father and son.
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing is like the protagonist Dan, something terrible happens to him as a kid. Basically, you find this out in the first chapter. It's not a spoiler or anything. He has an encounter with a serial killer when he's a child, and he fails to save the victim that the serial killer has with him at that point, and so he has this guilt going forward. But because this happens to him as a young child, it was always obvious to me that I needed the father and son relationship that was going to be there. And so then you think about, what do I want these characters to be? And you want these characters to be a little bit different. And so my intention, as I wrote it, was that Dan's father, John, he's quite emotional. He has a lot of problems controlling those emotions, controlling his anger, controlling his frustration, and he can take that out on the world a bit. And I wanted Dan to be quite different from that. He's very his mantra is, I am calm, I am in control, I'm not going to show the world anything, kind of thing. He's going to keep all that kind of trauma inside him. So I wanted those two characters to be quite different. So there was a bit of conflict between them. And so you have them sort of in their independent scenes, and when they're thinking back on their history together, you have them not understanding each other at all. They both kind of love each other and they want to connect, but they're just missing each other, because
Yeah.
they're talking slightly different languages, and they are both sort of proud of each other. Pride is an interesting, I mentioned that a few times. Like, it's natural in a sense for a son to want his father to be proud of him. But Dan's father also is very insecure, and so
Yeah.
he sees his son, even though his son has gone through all this trauma, and hasn't addressed it in certain ways. He sees his son as being a lot more successful than he is. And he wants his son to be proud of him, which doesn't occur to
Yeah.
Dan necessarily, that his father would need that from him, that kind of validation. And as the book goes on, they're in separate timelines, which is not a spoiler because
Mhm.
Dan's father is missing at the very beginning of the book, suspected of suicide. But you get these flashbacks to his father's investigation and Dan's present day investigation, where they're essentially kind of complementing each other, but just at different times with their different skills, their different abilities. And together, those things kind of work and build to the
They work
conclusion.
brilliantly well because just the way that they're juxtaposed together, even though they're in different timelines, really kind of peels away these different twists and turns that you don't expect
Yeah, it was a
perfectly. It's
pain. It was a
brilliant.
pain
Yeah.
to write. It was
I can imagine. Yeah.
because you don't want to repeat stuff, obviously. So you have to kind of get everything to sort of work in the right order, one thing after another. So, John does one thing and then Dan follows up on it, but you don't want to repeat it. You just want to kind of build on it and give the reader a little bit more information with each thing. But they're basically both following the same investigation in their own unique ways, and that kind of builds to what happens at the end.
And now you said that it was a pain to write, and because it is kind of this whole investigation, I'm quite curious about how you go about writing that. I kind of get the idea that maybe you like in some of these investigative criminal thriller type shows where we see the cops with these cork boards full of kind of the case files and the strings going from one
Yeah,
victim to
yeah.
another. Is that how you go about that as well to make sure that you don't kind of tread over the same material for each character when you kind of retread the different cases of this crime investigation that they both go through?
I don't have anything kind of visual or physical like that.
Right.
You kind of try to have it in your head a bit, I think. And the thing is, I write so many drafts. I try to write the book and I get it really badly wrong the first time. And then I'll probably write sort of 7 or 8 more drafts, moving stuff around, seeing where it fits and everything like that. And I have to do that. So that's the way I do it. I don't, by the time I've done that, I kind of have it in my head almost. I sort of understand where everything goes. So if an editor at that point, or my editor, says, "Oh, could you move this to here, or maybe this could change or something," you can think, "Yeah, I can do that." Or you think, nah, the book's going to fall over at that point. You
Right.
just sort of understand it without having like a visual thing. But I do use spreadsheets and stuff like that. And I use a software called Scrivener that I use to keep sort of track of stuff. But a lot of I mean, I keep elaborate spreadsheets, but it's kind of a work avoidance strategy. It's like I'll do my
Right.
spreadsheet rather than actually do the typing, which is what you need to do to get the book finished. But as much as possible, I try and keep it in my head, and it just evolves over time. So like the final draft of the Man Made of Smoke, I was moving stuff around here, there, and everywhere, and you just find ways to make like one scene flow into another in a certain way. Um, and over time, it just kind of like starts to become sort of more natural and seem quite seamless in the book. Um, so the reader doesn't notice it, even though I've been like throwing stuff around in the background
Right.
you know, before it comes out. Which, you know.
Uh-huh. I mean, coupled to that, I think we're allowed to say that the son and the father, they have imaginary conversations because they're not physically together from kind of the most of the book. Especially Daniel, he kind of likes to imagine conversations that he would have with his father. Those kind of conversations, I don't typically, when I watch those in films or in series, I don't typically get on with those too well because I like to have the characters that are actually physically are there. But this
Mhm.
really works because it teases possibilities, but at the same time, I guess it's kind of it's very, you've got to be very treacherous. You've got to be careful where you tread because you could kind of imagine something completely. I mean, the sky's the limit. You could have imagined anything that you wanted. So how did you kind of reel it in to make sure that it was believable? And you're giving hints towards what could possibly have happened without kind of going too far left field, if you were, if you know what I mean by
Yeah, yeah.
trying to kind of too deliberately pull the wool from under the readers.
Yeah, I mean, so in the book, Dan, after this encounter as a kid with the serial killer, he's grown up to become like a criminal psychologist. So he works with criminals, people who have committed violent crimes, and there's an indication he's done some profiling, but I didn't want to go too far down that route. Um, but he's kind of basically using the empty chair technique, where you put a client down and imagine, there's an empty chair across. What do you want to say to this person, kind of thing. But he's doing that to an extent with his father in the book and with the killer as well. He's beginning to try and do that based on what he knows. So he does have these conversations with his father, who at this point is missing. Um, and it's interesting to do that because, like you say, there is an element of not fooling the reader because he's not talking to his actual father at that point. He is talking to, or well, he's talking to he himself is being honest and talking, but the answers he gets are not really from a character. They're from his
Yeah,
idea of what his father would say.
it's almost like an
Um,
unreliable narrator almost. And I
yeah,
was
yeah,
wary
totally.
about these conversations because I didn't know how much of them to believe because I knew that he was speaking to someone that wasn't really there with him.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, hopefully I don't think there's anything that in those conversations that actively misleads the reader.
Yeah.
I do my best to use them actually to create quite a realistic dialogue between the two of them for most of the time. But of course, Dan does not know what's going on. He doesn't have access to everything that John does at that point. So the information he receives is necessarily kind of incomplete. And so you can play around with that a little bit. Um, but as I said, most of those conversations, all those conversations, in fact, are Dan's. Is Dan imagining what his father would say to him, and it's mostly correct, but
Mhm.
um, but not necessarily 100%. It's going to be
Yeah.
based on Dan's prejudices and beliefs about his father and beliefs about what's going on and all these other issues too. They're all going to play into that to create this kind of subconscious voice that he's hearing, that he's putting on his father, but it's a lot more complicated than that. But as I say, I don't think it misleads the
No, not
reader at
at all.
any
I
point.
was
I don't
worried that
lie
maybe
or
it would
anything like
do,
that.
but it's completely the opposite. It really, really, I think everything I remember anyway it felt very realistic once I found out what had actually happened in the end. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it would feel like a cheat to actively lie in that way. I
exactly.
think
Yeah,
you can kind of hide and occlude stuff, and oh, you've not mentioned that. I mean, the thing that Dan reminds himself of throughout the book while he's doing this is me talking back to me. I only know what I know, so my
yeah.
information is necessarily incomplete. But I never actively lie. It's just, you can sort of just not mention stuff maybe, or occlude stuff slightly, or just, put it through Dan's view of the world. And then, as the book goes on, obviously it shifts slightly.
Hmm. As you mentioned there, that Daniel, he's kind of on the side. He works as a police profiler as well, but he does also work with criminals
Yeah,
as as a psychologist, kind of helping them once after they've committed these criminal acts.
yeah,
So there's very central to the whole story is the fact that he works in that now, but his father's having been a policeman, he kind of feels like criminals that have committed these kind of crimes are monsters and you just chalk them up to that and at the end of the day. But whereas he sees them kind of as these redeemable characters now. So I'm quite curious, whereabouts did kind of the idea to kind of provide a commentary on whether or not these kind of criminals are irredeemable or not, where that came from, and how that kind of that developed throughout you kind of writing this story specifically.
Um, I'm not sure if Dan sees them as redeemable as such. It
Right.
depends what you mean by redeemable. That's an interesting word, you know.
Mhm.
Most of the people, I mean, it's not a huge part of the book, his work. Obviously, we move into the story quite quick. But most of the people that he works with are never going to be released from prison because of the things that they've done.
Mhm.
But I think his motivation is that he did have this encounter when he was 12, 13 years old, 12 years old, with this serial killer. And it was terrifying and it's haunted him his whole life, and he feels a huge amount of guilt over it. And his way of dealing with that and avoiding it is almost like there's no such thing as monsters. They're just men. I must understand what happened to me. You know, I don't need to be constantly afraid of this thing. I don't need it to kind of overshadow my life, kind of thing. I need to make sense of it. It needs to be
Right.
explicable. So that's his motivation for that. He wants to, you know, the people he treats are just men. They do horrible, horrible things. And I think that's my attitude to things in real life as well. You know, we often talk about people being evil, and that's usually, for me, a shorthand to the fact that they've done evil things. Um, and but to call the people themselves evil is almost like an abdication of responsibility in a sense. You know, it's like
Mhm.
you can just say, oh, they're evil, that's why they did it, rather than looking at the social factors and the psychological factors that put them, you know, that took them to that place. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
what I
I
love
think that,
what you say in this book a lot about. There's no such thing as monsters, I think is what Daniel says. No,
yeah, yeah.
constantly throughout the book, and it's so true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a position. There would be some people who disagree, who say, "Oh, you know, somebody who does something heinous is a monster," and you know, we use words for a reason, and so I couldn't really disagree with that necessarily. But it's not the end of the story. There are always reasons why people do what they do, and I think Dan's occupation on that level is an attempt for him to kind of make sense of what happened to him as a kid. You know, that this wasn't like as terrifying as it was and as awful as it was. This is not some monster out of a fairy tale, you know, that is absolutely inexplicable. He's trying to understand that, he's trying to humanize the wrong word, but trying to make sense of what happened. And then obviously the events in the book are going to test that a little bit, you know, in terms of can I make sense of this person? Why are they doing what they're doing? Um, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of my approach to it. I think I'm very reluctant to just dismiss people as bad or evil, and that's the end of it. You know, that's we should be looking at why things happened. You know, it's like, you know, you never see an evil baby. You know, they're all lovely,
Yeah.
but something happens. You know, through life, and it's more interesting to explore that and look at it and try and explain it, both to, you know, prevent it happening, but also just because I think that that's a more sensible way of looking at the world.
Mhm. Then a couple, I'm kind of coupled to that. It's not completely the same, but a couple to that. Daniel comes up against one of his old schoolmates,
Yeah.
classmates, who didn't treat him particularly well, who is now in a kind of a position of authority.
Mhm.
I'm quite curious. How did you? Was there a specific reason that you brought him in as kind of to juxtapose what Daniel has been through and kind of he's up against the monster, and then there's also what has taken his father's position in this place of authority now? I'm trying not to give things away here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no. Well, I mean, it's the character of Liam, who is like a childhood bully that he grew up with. Who when it takes place on an island basically, where his that's where Dan grew up, and his father was a policeman there, and now Liam is the head of the police there. When he returns, when his father disappears, um, and it's a relatively close-knit community, so the guy had to do something, so I thought I'll make him, well, not that I'd make him the policeman or the head of police, but I would make the head of police a bully, you know, that Dan encountered as a kid, you know, thinking about it that way around. It just kind of felt natural. But you want a bit of conflict, but you also don't want it to be like too cliched. So Liam
Yeah.
was a bully, you know, when Dan was a kid, and there's obviously going to be a kind of reckoning there, but it's not too extreme. It's kind of like a little background story almost, but just a way to kind of, you know, explore character and everything like that, I guess,
Mhm.
just to add a little bit in. So it was not a huge choice. I didn't set out going, oh, I'm going to
Right.
give Dan another nemesis or anything like that. But
Yeah.
it just kind of turned up when I was writing, and I thought that's interesting. You know, it's not like he Dan arrives on the island and Liam is belligerent and horrible to him and everything like
Yeah.
that. But it just not immediately anyway. But it kind of just creates a little bit of extra conflict, a little bit of
Yeah.
extra rough edge where you can get a bit of drama out of stuff, and it just seemed
Uh-huh.
very natural. Um,
And it wasn't. I'm guessing then from saying that it wasn't intentional, kind of, to have that character as kind of the face of policing and kind of in the current state of things. No.
sorry, the reception broke up at that
So
point,
no, I
so
was
I
going to
missed a couple.
say. So I'm guessing because you said that it wasn't kind of intentional for him to have another arch enemy. I'm guessing it wasn't intentional for you to have Liam as kind of the face of the authority now, kind of to
No,
say
I
anything
mean,
about current policing or anything like that.
oh God, no, 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 no.
Oh,
I mean, no, I mean, it would be a much more complicated book if I wanted to do
so
something like
definitely,
that
yeah,
about the state of. No, no. I mean, it's a very, very small island. It's not the real world, and I
yeah.
don't necessarily see it as being any specific place. I mean, Liam in the book is he's a childhood bully. It's a small community, and he's grown up to occupy he's pursued a position of relative power. But in effect, he's although he's head of police, it's a tiny little island, and it's not he has no real power. It's just he saw what power he has. And so he's chief of police, or I can't remember what rank I gave him. Um, but he's not a major antagonist. He's not a terrible person, even though he's kind of
Oh
like
yeah,
but it just adds that little extra sort of wrinkle and a little bit of conflict, and leads up to a little bit of rapprochement between them at the end in a way.
yeah. I mean, talking to the police force, was it complicated because both John and Daniel aren't kind of specifically working for the police, but they're solving this major crime? Was it difficult for you to kind of to have the police force not predominantly feature in the story because they're the ones that were supposed to be sorting it out and finding out what's happened, no? Because that happens in a lot of films they're usually trying to have people who aren't actually in the police who solve these big crimes. And but at the same time, they need to have the police in there some way, but kind of one foot out there so that it gives room for the protagonist to just kind of star in the story and solve the crime, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, 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 it's totally true, and it's always difficult because I don't normally when I have the first person and I have the third person, but my first person is usually not a police character. Um, and so that can always be an issue. You need to find a way to get them into the drama. With this, it was not too difficult because without giving anything away, the crimes that are happening are under the radar. They've not really come to the attention of the police for various reasons. So on that level, it wasn't too tricky. But the dilemma, I mean, writing it, the dilemma is why wouldn't Dan go to the police? Why wouldn't John go to the police with this information? That as they gradually uncover it over the course of the book. So that was a bit of you need to work out a reason for that. But again, without spoiling it, without giving anything away, there is a justification for why the police are not being involved, based on what people are discovering. So I tried to work with it on that level, really. But yeah, in general, it's like you just somebody would just call the police on
Yeah.
page one, and then there's no book. It's,
Mhm.
but with this one, I think it was a little bit easier than sometimes it is because there is that underlying reason
Yeah.
why this should not be brought to the attention of the police, almost.
Yeah. And I guess also because the father, I don't think it's just giving away that because the father was ex-police, he kind of knows what
Yeah,
happens, and he's working on these cold cases just to kind of to keep his mind busy, no, in retirement, no, that this kind of helps him kind of keep things going. It's almost like an Agatha Christie type thing that he wants to keep things going on in his head while he's no longer working for the police. So it kind of that works in your favor to not have the police specifically involved. Yeah.
yeah, no, totally. And that, I mean, again, that's another reason why probably Liam evolved as the character he is because John Dan has left the island, when the book begins. John has been there the whole time, is John his father, and he's a former policeman now, and Liam is in charge of the police, and there's a bit of kind of like volatility between them. So he doesn't want to, um, he's very reluctant to go to the police himself
Hmm.
because, he feels diminished and frustrated by his life and everything like that. So he doesn't kind of want to hand it over to the police. He wants, something for himself. He wants to do something a little bit more. He wants to solve the crime. He's never kind of been involved with a big crime before. He's just a policeman on a little island. So there is that kind of impulse in him. So putting Liam in a position of authority in that way kind of added to that, I suppose.
Mhm. I mean, you mentioned that these crimes are kind of under the radar, but there is specific mention of, I don't know if it's a serial killer, I can't remember exactly now, but it's called the Pied Piper. And
Yeah,
you specifically mentioned a book, which is it's goes by the same name as the book itself.
yeah.
How much of those are inspired by a kind of a real life crime, or is it something completely made up by yourself?
It's completely made up. I mean,
Completely made
yeah,
up, yeah. I mean, but just
yeah. I mean,
when you came up with the name of a book and another author and kind of things like that, I imagine maybe there was something that inspired you to for the Pied Piper
no, no. I
itself.
mean, I'm
No,
always interested in kind of meta fiction and stuff like that. So, I like books within books. So within in The Man Made of Smoke, my book, there is another book called The Man Made of Smoke, which is a true crime book. The serial killer that Dan encounters as a child is known as the Pied Piper, and I don't want to say too much, but there is a true crime book about him and the account of him and the murders that he committed, and which is all like 20 odd years ago. And I just thought it was interesting. My book was always going to be called The Man Made of Smoke
right.
from um, within the process, and then I have the book within the book, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to call it the same thing, just because it kind of
It
works for
sounds
reasons.
cool.
No, no, I mean, but
No, I'm
it kind
joking.
of works for certain the book
Yeah.
itself, actually, the true crime book within the book, you don't get many extracts from it or anything. It's more just an object.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, but plays it plays quite an integral part in the story. And it's kind of almost, without wanting to sound like an idiot, it's kind of the book itself is almost like a metaphor, for this book, this true crime account contains a huge amount of trauma, and it's being passed from person to person, which is how trauma works in real life. Hurt people, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite yeah. So the book's quite important in it.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
doesn't give away any sort of plot points. It doesn't. There's no clues in it necessarily or anything like that. But it's kind of like it was quite an important sort of totem for me in my head that this book that Daniel reads obsessively as a kid, because his mind is preoccupied with what happened, and
To
this killer
understand
that
what
he could have
happened. Yeah.
stopped, perhaps could have saved somebody. So he's going to read this book over and over and over again, and the book kind of then plays a part in terms of how it's passed on. Just as a metaphor, but it's nice to play with these things, and it needed
Yeah,
a
no, because
title, so
it
it's
just look
like,
it's because you named the specific book, The Man Made of Smoke by Terence O'Hare, and I was like, oh, it sounds like it could be something that actually
oh,
real.
no,
So
no,
yeah,
no,
just
no, it's
because
just
you kind
made
of
up
named
totally.
somebody specifically, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Uh-huh.
it's all completely fictional. I just
Yeah.
made it all
Hmm.
up.
Uh-huh. I mean, earlier also you mentioned there's Daniel's mantra is detached and calm. Now it's kind of stay away from things, keep detached so that you can remain calm. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
also we see there's another. I think we're allowed to say the metaphor that nobody sees and nobody cares,
yeah,
which is
sure. I
another
mean, that's
metaphor in there. So we've got those two metaphors in there, um, which do kind of feel very closely related at the same time, even though they're two mantras from two very different people.
mhm.
I'm quite curious. What was it about those two mantras that you decided they would kind of be work perfectly in this book? Where did they kind of come from, and what did you want to represent with those thematically speaking?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but I guess they are kind of related. They both evolved over time. Like I say, I mean, I write loads and loads of drafts, and so um, different things come in. But I think the nobody sees, nobody cares thing was there very, very early on from the first scene that I wrote, because the killer that Dan is encounters at the beginning, the Pied Piper, is saying this to everybody. Nobody sees, nobody cares. Um, Although he's actually talking to the child that's with him. That's it's kind of revealed after a few pages, and he's basically trying to convince the child of the badness of the world, almost. The fact that it doesn't matter. You think that people are good, you think people are going to save you, but they won't. Nobody sees, nobody cares. We walk past people every day without paying any attention whatsoever. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to help you. So that was a very early kind of, which is kind of horrible, but it
Yeah,
was that was kind
and it
of
It was quite curious, but I mean, it really struck me, especially when I was getting towards the end of the book, because started thinking about things like social media and these kind of things, where so
Yeah.
many people can actually see what's going on. But like you said,
Well,
everyone sees, but nobody really sees and nobody really cares, which kind of really struck home when I was reaching the end of the book.
yeah, I mean, I mean, that's a massive subject. Do we want to go there?
Yeah.
Social media, I don't know.
But I
But
don't know why,
like,
but it was something that came into my head. But once I read this phrase over and over again, it was just
yeah, yeah,
something that struck me towards the end of the book. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, well, to go back to like Dan's mantra, I mean, that kind of evolved separately, I guess. He says, "I'm calm, I'm controlled, I'm in it, I'm in charge of everything." He's just reassuring himself, I mean, so it was slightly separate from what the killer is saying. It's his way of just saying everything's fine, you don't need to worry, just remember everything's fine. And it doesn't become increasingly desperate in a kind of comedic sense, but
Oh no.
certainly 2/3 of the way through the book, it's like he doesn't believe it. He knows that it's a
Mhm.
desperate attempt to cling on to
Yeah, he just says
life
it
being
because it's
okay.
something that he's
Yeah,
yeah embedded
it's
in
just
there.
a
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a coping mechanism. So much, it's a self-defensive mechanism to protect himself from memories and from kind of like trauma and from what's going on. But it's not true, obviously. He
Yeah,
knows
sure.
that deep down.
Uh-huh. Brilliant. Well, listen, I'm going to, before I let you go, obviously we know that the Whisper Man is it in pre-production currently? I don't know how much you're involved in that one
It's I'm not
and
really
how
involved.
much
I
you're
mean,
allowed to say.
well, it's being filmed at the moment, so that's
Yeah.
nice.
But must be why. I mean, obviously, just recently I saw The Rule of Jenny Penn. I imagine you've
Yeah,
seen that
yeah,
because
yeah,
the director is going to direct The Whisper Man. I mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
fantastic. And its own, that's fantastic. But to have Robert De Niro, Michael Keaton, Adam Scott, Michelle Monaghan, Owen Teague all in the same movie
Yeah,
based on
yeah,
your book,
no,
it must be mind blowing, though.
it's totally surreal, because I mean, it was first the Whisper Man was first optioned in like 2018. Um, so it's been like 7 years that it's been, and you kind of know as a writer that film and TV works really, really slowly, and sometimes it
Yeah.
just doesn't happen at all. You put it out of your head,
Yeah.
think,
In
I'll
the
believe it
scripts,
when it's
it
on the
gets,
screen.
yeah, picked up. And then 2 years later, it's not going to happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just been sort of ticking away slowly. And I mean, like James Ashcroft, I spoke to him a few years ago, but you just kind of think, oh, it's not going to happen, and then suddenly you get an email going, oh, yeah, this is happening, this is happening, this person's attached, everything like that, and it's just really, really cool. I mean, I mean, I couldn't be happier. I mean, you mentioned the cast there, and it's like,
It's
I
wild.
mean, what do you say? It's kind
Yeah.
of it's just astonishing, and I don't cast the book in my head when I'm writing it.
Yeah, no, I
I
mean,
don't
that
have
was what
much
I'm
of
going to
it.
ask you. I mean, having this cast now in place, and you look back at when you kind of sat in your bedroom or wherever you write, creating these characters must be wild to kind of to compare how you imagine them to what we're going to get on the big screen, surely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I kind of don't have a visual picture of most of them, but when I got the casting information, it's like, yeah, no, totally, I totally get that. It's yeah, I mean, I'm not too involved. I've read the screenplay and everything like that, um, and yeah, I'm just really, really excited to see what they do with it.
Mhm.
Um,
I mean, you said you read the
because
screenplay. Is it Ben Jacobi and Chase Palmer? I think it is, no, who wrote It
yeah,
and The
yeah,
First Omen, which are both fantastic horror movies as well. Have you
yeah,
actually
yeah, no,
spoken to them, or
totally.
have you just read the screenplay?
I met Ben early
You
on
met them.
in proceedings, and yeah, and exchanged a few emails with him. He's great. I've not spoken to Chase, but they've done a fantastic job with it. It's a really weird book, The Whisper Man, because it's. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's not read it, but it's kind of like a child abduction novel, but the child doesn't get abducted until like 3/4 of the way through, which is very, very difficult to film. But they've done a fantastic job kind of adapting the screenplay, and like everything that I wanted, everything that was important to me about the book is in there. They've
Uh-huh.
obviously had to change some things to make it work on screen, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't be happy with it.
Uh-huh. Also, because it's an American production, I mean, for example, The Man Made of Smoke it feels very British. There's a lot of kind of
Okay,
the
interesting.
service station, these kind of words, but then places as well, very, very British.
Hmm.
So, what was it like reading The Whisper Man, which I imagine is kind of very, very American compared to kind of your original vision as well, no?
I mean, it was fine actually because I don't think of location. I
Right.
think about location. It's very important to me in terms of I want the location to suit the book and I want it to be appropriate kind of thematically or something like that. But I don't think of it as being in a particular real world
Right.
place. You know, I
Yeah, I mean
do it,
this one, for example, the Man Made a Smoke felt very British, but I could never
yeah.
say where it was specifically. Yeah, exactly, because I don't think you mentioned any place names at all. No.
It really annoys me whenever I have to mention a place name. Because
Yeah.
I have to make one up, and then there'll always be somebody who reads the book, and it'll be a real place somewhere, and they'll go, "Oh, it's at that," but it's not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very hard to avoid giving a place name. But with the Whisper Man, yeah, I mean, I guess you can say it's probably set in the UK, the book, and the film obviously is not. But ultimately, it's a story about fathers and sons, and that's universal. You can set it
Yeah.
anywhere. Everybody is worried about their kid, you know, and everybody has difficult relationships with, familially. So
Hmm.
you can kind of set it anywhere. Hopefully, that's always my intention. So yeah, no, it's great. I can't wait to see what they do with it.
No, no, I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic, and especially with that cast and the directors. Have you seen? I mean, imagine you've seen The Rule of Jenny Penn. No, it's a fantastic movie as well. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that. And his first film, Coming Home in the Dark, is brilliant too.
I've
Have you
not
seen
seen that
that?
one. I haven't seen that one. No.
It's fantastic. Honestly, what he does in the first, I don't know, 20 minutes of that, it's like, yeah.
Oh, Root, yeah,
I
brilliant,
mean, the rest
brilliant.
of it's good too, but it's like,
No,
you
but yeah,
know,
but that's super good.
but it knocks your socks off in the first few
Uh-huh.
at the beginning.
I'll have a look for that one. Yeah, brilliant. So listen, just before I let you go, then, obviously you've got this one coming out very soon,
Hmm.
but every writer that I speak to has got about 10, 15, 20 different books on the go in different stages. Maybe not that many, but
Yeah.
is there anything that you can tell us about that you have got coming out soon? Because I was looking on Amazon just before, and there's like two or three books that I hadn't heard of that are coming out
Okay.
later on
Yeah.
this year. Is that right, or is that
That is a complicated, ongoing situation. So,
right?
I mean, what I'm doing work-wise at the moment is Man Made a Smoke comes out sort of next week-ish. And I've got another book plotted out and I'm writing that. The books that are up on Amazon, because I didn't always write as Alex North. I wrote under a
Right,
different name. So I had 10 books out under a different name. Um, and Michael Joseph in the UK are going to put out five of them. We've got the rights back, and we're going to do that. And I don't quite know how we're going to do it. It's going to be like, my former name, Steve Mosby, writing as Alex North or something like that. But it's very important for me that people don't who bought them already don't rebuy them, because I don't want to con
right.
anyone. But basically, those will be five older books. But if people like the Alex North books, they'll like those because they're exactly the same
Sure.
kind of thing. They're
Yeah.
crime thrillers with a supernatural, creepy element. But I don't quite know when they're coming out. They're
Uh-huh.
on Amazon, I think, as placeholders, but I'm not quite sure what we're going to do with them. But
Right.
there is that material eventually. But that's all done. I don't need to worry about
Oh yeah, sure.
that.
And then in terms of what you writing now, is there anything you can hint at?
No, I mean it's very,
No,
very early days for it,
very early
but it will
days.
be a similar kind of thing. It will be
Yeah.
a spooky psychological thriller. Um, but since it is so early and I go through so many drafts, it will probably change. So I could tell you
Right.
something now, and it would be
It'll be
rubbish by the end
completely
of it.
different. Yeah. I don't know about rubbish.
Yeah, well, no, I mean it wouldn't be accurate. It would be something
Yeah.
completely different.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, Alex. I really appreciate it.
No,
Uh,
God, thank you for having me.
can't,
It's been
can't,
great.
oh no, it's great. I mean, I've loved the book to bits. I can't wait I mean, I hadn't read it yet, but I've got the Whisper Man
Oh God, I
on
spoiled it
how
for
to
you.
read next. No,
I
no,
spoiled
no,
it for
no,
you.
no. I had to ask because I know the movie's coming out soon. I had to ask you about it. But yeah, and I've ordered the other books as well that I haven't
Oh,
read, so
thank
I
you.
can't wait to read those as well.
Oh, I
Again,
hope you
thank you so
like
much for
them,
your
man.
time. I
Thank
wish you
you.
the best of luck with the release. I'm sure it's going to go down really, really well. And
Oh, I appreciate it very
I
much. Thank you for your time.